Tagwe Atiauno, Diri Dr. Ellen Fernandez-Sacco, Daka Kawai at Aha. Greetings, relatives. My name is Ellen Fernandez-Sacco, and I'm very happy to be here today. Today, I'm presenting El Registro de Esclavos, an archive you need to know. I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I am an independent scholar, genealogist, and blogger. I am currently completing a book project called Reconstructing the Missing Volume of the Registro de Esclavos from Northwest Puerto Rico. That's about 1,300 transcriptions for the registration papers in one collection, and for family histories, tables and charts that will help people find their ancestors. My project is important because it shows how digitized archival materials make visible the connections between slavery, genealogy, and family history in Puerto Rico. And these are important because it's a means of writing our ancestors back into the historical narrative. And what I'm going to cover is a brief overview of slavery, very brief, become familiar with the documents of the Registro de Esclavos, the kind of information in there. You're going to learn about the Moray Law of 1870, why this registro is useful for documenting ancestors, and the digitized collections that are available. I want you to gain an understanding of the collection through examples and then through a case study that's going to show you how this is useful in genealogical research. So now I'm going to give you a little bit of context. One of the hardest genealogical tasks that we have is connecting with our enslaved ancestors, and this record set gives us the opportunities to find them. The main database that I'm going to be talking around is Puerto Rico Slave Registers, 1863 to 1879, and I'm going to offer a case study, as I mentioned. So Puerto Rico is in the Caribbean Basin. It's like practically every country that you see in that map has a long history of colonization, indigenous and African enslavement, and migration, just waves of migration. We're located between the island of Hispaniola, which today is Haiti, and the Dominican Republic, and the Virgin Islands. And Arawak tribes came to these areas some 5,000 years ago. So it didn't happen in 1492. Slavery in Puerto Rico starts early. Taino ancestors enslaved in fields and mines around 1495. It starts earlier elsewhere, but we're just talking about Puerto Rico. The population takes a big hit. It starts to collapse from disease and conditions, and enslaved African ancestors arrive in Puerto Rico in 1510. They're brought over because of a license that's granted as a result of the situation with the Taino, and they need to continue their business. African slavery is legal in the Caribbean 10 years before. And now we're going to fast forward to 1873, when slavery is abolished, because that's the time period I'm talking about. And by that time, some 31,000 people are still enslaved. And this process of emancipation in Puerto Rico is not a quick thing. It doesn't end on one day in 1873. It finishes in 1886. I want to give you an idea of the scale of enslavement across nations. Cuba is much larger than Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico has actually the smallest number of enslaved by this time period. We're talking the 1870s. But Puerto Rico also, because of this small number, has often been ignored in the literature. So you have less access to historical articles about slavery in Puerto Rico, for instance, than you would for some place like Cuba, which at one point was 10 times the number of Puerto Rico, and by this time, by 6 times less. You can compare it to the United States, Brazil, which had among the largest numbers on here. So we're not talking about a big number for Puerto Rico, but it's still the same institution, just as violent, just as extractive. And we have, the percentage of a large non-white free population is evident in Puerto Rico. The population increases over time, and this chart from Francisco Scarano's Sugar and Slavery on Plantation Economy of Ponce gives you an idea between 1834, 1846, and 1869. There are more stories about the categories themselves, like who considers themselves blancos and how did you get to be free colored and how that is configured in Puerto Rico. But really right now, what I want to show you is just that in 1869, about the time period that we're talking about, there's about 600,000 people on the island, and about 238,000 are free people of color. And, the number of slaves is actually decreased by that time. The Registro Central de Esclavos is the result of a lot of legislation that was passed to count and register enslaved persons in Puerto Rico in 1868. It consists of cedulas, which are registration forms, empadronamientos, which is a mouthful, their censuses, their local censuses, I'll show you in just a minute, and their volumes, the 1872 volumes for each district of Puerto Rico, and some of those are missing, and I'll talk about that as well. There are some additional documents, like censuses for a small number of municipalities, but really the Registro Central de Esclavos has a lot of information in it. So now we're going to look briefly at some articles for the Ley Moret, and one of the things that starts before it, and before returning to the documents and the case study. So the Moret law is passed in 1870, but just before, there is a document passed, a decree passed on the 17th of September that's reiterated in the Moret Act, that is, quedan declarados libres todos los nacidos de mujer esclava a partir del 17 de septiembre próximo, pasado. So, which is all those born to enslaved women after the 17th of September last are declared free. You may know this as the Ley de Vientres, or the law of free wombs. And this was in order to keep children out of slave trafficking. It's one strategy. The Ley Moret was passed on the 4th of June, 1870, and it consists of 21 articles, and these are a form of gradual emancipation. All enslaved persons born between the 17th of September, 1868 to June, 1870 are acquired by the state, and owners were paid an indemnity of 125 pesetas per person. So now these people are owned by the state. They're technically free, but they're involved with a series of contracts with either the former owners or other plantation owners. They're not full citizens for another 5 years. So these former enslavers or the contractors, they're responsible for maintaining them, for providing them help when they get sick, and to give basic education necessary to be an artisan or a laborer. And then the law, the official emancipation law, passes on the 22nd of March in 1873. I'm showing you an image of women washing clothes in Ponce. By the age of some of the women in this image, some of these women themselves could have been passed through the process of emancipation. And they're basically doing the same work as before, which is being a lavandera, washing clothes in a river. And even though this is 1900, a lot of people are stuck doing the same things that they were doing before. And another thing I just find so interesting about the stereo card is that guy who's kind of overseeing the labor there, like they didn't know what they were doing. But anyway, maybe he's asking something else. The stipulations of the Moret law are what shapes family histories. So when we look at children, they work for no pay for their former enslavers until they're 18 years of age. They're under the control of their mothers. At 18, they get a pay that's half the wage of a free person of an equivalent class and occupation. And then the other half of that pay was reserved so they'd have something when they were freed. They'd have a certain amount of money. Exactly how well this worked out, I don't know. At 22, the patronato would end, and then the person would receive the capital. It's very possible that this situation was rife with problems, much as the Freedmen's Bank was in the United States when they also made arrangements to try to help people save money. I'm not sure what happens. I will try to find that out. The patronato ends if the liberto or liberta gets married. And this is pretty important to remember because it will conflict with your estimates for when people get married. It's actually quite younger. Girls were married at 14, 18 for boys. So people are starting their families very young. The patronato also ends if there's abuse, or if the patron tries to prostitute the person, and then a complaint is filed and a different work detail is found for that person. So the law is actually published in La Gaceta de Puerto Rico, which is the official newspaper. It's available in the Library of Congress website. I encourage you to explore the newspaper. It has many things in it, but particularly this issue, if you check it out, it's the entire 4 pages of the paper, lists all of these articles for the abolition law. And this provides a structure for change for the country to move forward so that people can move into full citizenship at some point. What is important for the Registro de Esclavos right now is the 3 departments that were subdivided. And I've kind of shown that in this newspaper clipping here. It's basically the Northeast, the Northwest, and the South. Primer departamentos is Northeast, segundo departamento is the Northwest, and the tercer departamento. So the program is administered through these departments through a paid appointment for a protector de libertos, a protector of libertos, somebody who would oversee the process and be the person in between the contract and the state, the contract, the person, the contract, the state. So there's the other thing to remember too, the 1873 law is that people are sold right up to the time of the law's passing. So now I want to talk about the Registro Central de Esclavos. So where do you find these documents? Well, there's several places online. The main source is the Puerto Rico slavery records that I mentioned on FamilySearch, and we'll look more closely at that in a minute. There's a collection of Puerto Rican slave documents at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. This consists of 83 items. There's slave registration documents in Puerto Rico and a collection at Harvard that's 5 items. There's a slave registry form at Avery Library, the College of Charleston, and one at the Smithsonian. If there's anybody from these institutions listening, I would love to encourage you to have the people who appear on these documents be transcribed so people can connect with them. It's not simply that these are examples of slave documents, but that they also contain information which is valuable to us. And I'll show you what this looks like. So here's what the panel for the landing page for the Registro Central de Esclavos is on FamilySearch. You don't get there directly from the search page. On the left-hand side, there's a window for historical collections. And when you type in Puerto Rico, you'll see it populated by some for parish records, whatever. And then slave registers will come up. You select that and you will get to this image. And this collection combines a lot of stuff. Not every single thing is accessible. And as I will tell you more about some of the challenges of working with this for family history, some of the problems I've encountered here is that some records are not yet indexed. There is an ongoing process of transcription. I don't have a sense of how complete that might be at this point. Some of the records are only visible at a FamilySearch center, such as the census records, the one-sheet empadronamientos. I'm not sure why. It can be difficult to attach a file such as a cedula to a family tree, even though you have other documents that show this is indeed the same person on this document. I've had that happen where it just hangs up and then there's no carryover. You can't really search for enslaved ancestors that are indexed on there exactly. They come up, but you're really going to need to know a little bit more about them to figure out that this is indeed your person. There is a disturbing kind of element to it. It's kind of a little troubling is that enslavers can appear as parents and there are no fields that address this relationship on there. They are not encoded as enslavers. The catalog results can have additional institutional collections. They could be out there, but information, but that doesn't appear with the transcriptions. And then even though you might find out who the enslaver is, you really need to have a system for locating haciendas and any available documentation. So now I'll show you what these images look like. So this is these are the Puerto Rican slave documents from the Schomburg Center. And the persons listed are on here. They're in columns on the left, their numbers, age, gender, state. The same thing that I'll show you on the cedulas in just a minute. The persons on here are Maria Socorro, 40, Domingo, who's 2 years old, Felita, who's 1. Domingo and Felita, the daughters are the children of Belen. Belen is the daughter of Leonarda, and the enslaver is a woman, Antonia Martinez. So just right off the bat here, we have 3 generations in one family mentioned on this document. Between the children, Belen and her mother, you have a woman enslaver. Women in Puerto Rico could run businesses, could own enslaved people, could own land on their own. They can run this on their own. There may not be a lot of women, but it's very different than the United States, where you see that a woman's property is underneath her husband's. This is another situation. And one of the wonderful things about this is the opportunity to see these documents in color rather than the black and white microfilm that you have on FamilySearch. And then along the bottom, you can go and see you could see what items there are to follow up. And what I want to show you is the back of this form. So on the back, it gives you instructions for filling out the form, to how to fill that out. And it also offers the person filling it out the articles of the law on slave trafficking. So if you don't fill this out, it kind of tells you what's going to happen. The next document I'll show you in this Schomburg collection at the Schomburg is the cedula, which is the official registration document. And there are over 30,000 of these that make up the main part of the Registro Central de Esclavos. So here you have Rosa, who's the daughter of Rosa. Her enslaver is Don Fermín Soto González, and the location is Hato Viejo, Archivo, and this is 1868. You can put all of this into a timeline and then work more to find out more information on these family members. There are the district volumes for the 1872 Registro Central de Esclavos, and these were transcribed into volumes. Volume 3 is missing, and that's where I come in with that. But on this chart, you could see how these municipalities are listed. And if you know anything about Puerto Rico, there's 78 municipalities. There's not 78 municipalities here. And this map that was on the Hennes Gibara website in 2015 had this great map that offered a visual view of what that looked like. Where are these? You know, not where they are, but like what's missing. And you could see it's quite a bit. And this is District 3 right here on the upper left-hand side. I'll just go back to that for a second. There are workarounds for these. They may be included under some other types of census. I'm not sure if there was yet another volume for the eastern side of the island. My work is primarily on the west side, but still it's notable, but it also gives you a flag that you will need workarounds if you're in these areas, working in these areas. These are the landing pages for Full 3 and for Ancestry for the 1872 Registro de Esclavos. This is not 100%. I think a lot of people have gotten confused by this and just not realize the complexity of the collections and not realize that this is basically incomplete because of these missing areas. And then you'll search and not come up with anything. So obviously this is another reason why the FamilySearch collection becomes so important. So what can you learn from these documents in this record set? Well, you can find out about origins. You can find out if your ancestor was born in Puerto Rico, if they're born in Africa, born in Curaçao, born in Venezuela, or somewhere else. You can learn about their age. You can learn about their appearance, the kind of work that they did. There's often like three main categories that I've seen, which are labrador, which is agricultural laborer, domestica, a domestic servant, cocinera, which could be male or female, a cook. Also, more rarely is sastrería, a person who's doing sewing the clothes on the plantation. But that also appears on the cedula. So you find out what barrio they're in. You find out who the potential family members were before emancipation, because sometimes, life is tough, and many of these people didn't. Some of these children that appear on these documents do not make it to adulthood. You'll find out when some people were manumitted, because that will be written on the form if you were born by a certain date, or if you were over 60 years of age, you would be manumitted. And that's technically how it's supposed to go. You'll find out who their enslaver was, and in some cases, you'll get some clues there from their health and conditions. You'll see that they may be having injuries. They may be, one aged person was described as doblado, literally doubled, that they're blind or whatever. And I cover some of this in the articles I've published. And now I want to speak a little bit about Florentina Peot, who survived the Middle Passage to die in Moca in 1899. So Florentina was born about 1811. We don't know specifically where in Africa. And she was born in Moca. I mean, she lived in Barrio Aceitunas, Moca. And now I'm going to go through the two halves of the cedula so that you could get a closer look at like what's on there. So this is the left side. It's señas particulares, which are the physical details. So you have edad, which is age. So she's 56 years old. Estatura, her stature. It says regular, so probably about 4'11", something like that. Some people actually write a number in there, which is pretty amazing. Color, which is skin color. And you can get this, like, it's a rainbow. I'm telling you, it's a rainbow for this category. So you will learn something about that. Learn more about the specific appearance of people. It also has a thing about entry for hair texture. It will also tell you if they had a beard and what kind of beard, if that beard was skimpy, whether it was full, whether it was full of white hairs. It will tell you the color of their eyes. It will tell you about the shape of their nose, about the size of their mouth. So we don't have photographs of people, but it can give you kind of an idea of how some people's appearances may have been, how people may have looked at this time. Okay, so for Florentina, on the right side of the cedula, we have the folio number. We have the pueblo that she's in, which is Moca, the municipality. The cedula is rural. They're either rural or they're urban, has her name, right? Then we have her enslaver, which is Juan Peot. And then natural is where she was born, which is Africa. The status is single, soltera. And for most people, you'll see single. Some people will be married, but it's a tiny number of people out of the number of cedulas that you can, that I've reviewed. It hasn't been very many. I don't even know if it's been 10%. It gives you their title, which is what kind of the oficio, what kind of work are they performing? Here she's a labradora, so she's an agricultural laborer. Doing what exactly? I had to do additional research to find out. Was she coartado? No, that's a self-paid manumission. I recently published this article in the latest issue of the Og's Journal. I have an article on coartación, so if you would like to learn more about that, there's an article about it there. It lists the barrio and tells us who she is a child of, and that's simply a line here. For other people who are born in Africa, it can say de padres desconocidos, unknown parents, unknown parentage. And it could also have her partner's name, and it says tiene 6 hijos, the name of her children. So it was Saturnino, Luciano, Marta, Marcelo, Pio, and Juan. We don't know if she actually gives the name or who actually names the children, but one thing you will see in families is the continuation of naming as a pattern. So to learn more, I drew on different kinds of resources. And for instance, here's just a group of maps to show you the location where Florentina and other persons who were enslaved by the Peot family and by Juan Lavadi were enslaved in Northwest Puerto Rico. Barrio Aceitunas, Moca itself is a municipality that's about 5 miles from the ocean, founded in 1772. So we do have a long history of slavery there. And then the map for the barrios can show you where Aceitunas is. It's the very northernmost municipality of Moca. And you could see that it's on 5 different municipalities border Moca. And when you study a plantation, you want to find out about that location, because if they straddle different municipalities, then some of those record sets could potentially be split. So your information may not all be in Moca, it could be in Isabela, or could be in other details in Aguadilla, for example. And as I mentioned, this was a coffee plantation where Florentina was enslaved. It was called Hacienda Iruena. That's like a Basque name. It was founded by Don Juan Peot, the first decade of the 19th century. He arrived thanks to the Real Cedula de Gracias of 1815, which brought a lot of French nationals to the island, and they were given additional land, and they didn't have taxes for a certain amount of time, and they got even more property if they brought enslaved people over with them. Peot dies, before Peot dies, I believe, he sells the plantation to Juan Lavadi, who's another guy from France, from the Pyrenees. And in an 1889 military map, I found the plantation is still listed there. And if you want to get an idea of where some places were located, the military maps are very, very handy, because plantations were not necessarily sold off, but inherited by different people in the family. And many times the same names are attached to them, and you can find them on these military maps. And there's a large collection of them on the Archivo Digital Nacional de Puerto Rico. And it's that hacienda is in the oval on the upper side. What I'm showing here in the middle is a satellite view of Barrio Aceitunas. The historian Antonio Nieves Mendez, in his book on Moca, made a reference to Lavadi's property having the location where the enslaved people live was close to the Riego de Moca, the canal of Moca. So I looked on a satellite map to see, is it possible that any building survive or any mark in the landscape? And surprisingly enough, there's a big area that you can see from the sky, probably not visible from the ground. And this is the former location of Petite Guinea. And there were about 125 people who were enslaved here. This is one of the 3 larger plantations in Moca. And at this time it was coffee, and later became sugar. What I don't have images of people laboring in Puerto Rico to give you an idea of what that might look like, but there is an image from Cuba from 1866 that show women working on sorting the coffee beans, picking out rocks or whatever material before, after the harvest. And they worked together, and they shared songs that they worked to. I've written about that in another article. But this kind of starts to give you an idea of what kinds of things Florentina may have been doing during her time there. This is the Plantation Big House today. And this also has a very interesting story tied to it. The Hacienda Iruena is Hacienda Lavadi. In 1903, the wife of Juan Labadie, Cornelia Peot, hired a French architect to build this. Cornelia herself was the daughter of Dorotea, who was a woman who was enslaved at this plantation before. Cornelia married Juan Labadie in 1893. She hired Paul Servogin, a French engineer, to build this building. And one of the things I would love for this structure to be is a location for enslaved descendants to meet and to share information on their ancestors. I don't know if the municipality would go with that, but I think it would be a wonderful use for this site. Florentina Peot is a matriarch. She's a female-headed household, and that's one thing that you will find across the documents of the civil registration, is there are many female-headed households. She has many descendants. She had some 10 children. I was able to reconstruct this tree thanks to a combination of resources. I used a census, I used cedulas, I also depended on a descendant to help with any additional information. So she has many grandchildren, many great-grandchildren, and people who are tied to her today. And I want to give thank you, mil gracias, to her descendant, Ernie Rivera Rios, for permission to talk about his third great-grandmother today. So to build context for the ancestors on the cedulas, what you want to use everything you can get your hands on, frankly. You want to use parish records. You want to use protocolos notariales, even though they're earlier ones, the ones that we have access to, most of them because of conditions, start after 1830. This will give you information on sales of property and sales of people as well. And I've worked something about some cajas to extract information on that as well and make that available to people. There's the Registro Civil, which begins in 1885, and why it's so important as an adjunct to the Registro de Esclavos, because we're only talking about a 15 to 18-year period between these two documents. So the chances is that many of the people in these documents will turn up in the civil registration. What I want to tell you, though, is that people can have surnames. The surnames can appear on an empadronamiento, and they will not appear on a cedula. People can have surnames, and then they can change them. You'll find people that may have surnames of liberto. If it wasn't for that, you wouldn't know if they were enslaved at all. So it's going to take a lot to suss documents to be able to put everything together to be sure that you have the right person. You want to search across the documents in the Registro de Esclavos to see if there are different forms that they may appear on. You want to look in municipal documents. You want to look at military maps, like the ones from the Archivo Digital Nacional de Puerto Rico. Look at newspapers. The Library of Congress has probably the best collection right now for looking at Puerto Rican newspapers. There's, I think, 9 of them. They have a long run of the Gaceta de Puerto Rico on there. You want to look at local histories. Puerto Rico has a long history of self-publishing, longer than you ever knew. And there are many local histories that you can get a hold of that will have accounts by people. And now there are at least a couple of books starting to come out where people are offering histories of their families under enslavement. Now, the other thing to think about is oral histories. Sometimes when names are mentioned, when details come to light, it starts to spark people's memories about a connection they have. So don't think that there might not be an oral history that's relevant to the person that you're searching from. And then, so basically the steps for working with the Registro Central de Esclavos, we got about 6 steps. You want to determine the names of your ancestors before 1873. You want to find their locations. You want to get specific. Find out what barrios they were in, what wards, what municipalities they live in. It could be a number of them. You want to understand the context of the kind of work they did and who were their enslavers. You want to supplement that with additional information from different repositories. You want to check the series of cajas in the Walter J. Cardona collection at the Archivo Digital Nacional de Puerto Rico for more documents. This is a massive series of documents. Basically, it came out as a result of photographs that were done of pictures, little pictures of the items in a given caja, which is a box, and those are collected into PDFs. Some of these PDFs are humongous. They can be 600 to 1,000 pages long. They have about 4 of them that are for specifically dealing with slavery, but you can also find documents dealing with slavery and other, the documents are collected under different municipalities, so you need to check that too. And then join Facebook groups for genealogy on Puerto Rico. I run one on the history and genealogy of slavery in Puerto Rico. If you're interested in joining, please, send me a message, DM me. And if you have any questions, I'd love to take them now. And thank you so much for being here today.